Y'all wanted to hear one of my totally true, not bullshit stories from when I was younger, and the story that y'all picked was the time that I got fired from GameStop. So, the year is 2005, I think. This would have been 15 years ago. It was 2005. And there's a GameStop. This is when GameStop was rapidly expanding, and they were in the process of buying all of their competition, right? They were still owned by Barnes & Noble, which I don't know if you knew that, but at one point GameStop was owned by Barnes & Noble booksellers, which is the reason why every GameStop employee also got 10% off if they went to a Barnes & Noble. So Barnes & Noble owned GameStop, and GameStop was making money hand over fist because the used game market was experiencing something of a bubble, you could say. So, you know, Software, etc., Babbage's, Funko Land, Electronics Boutique, they bought them all. They bought all of them and turned them all into GameStops. They did have some competition back then. Hollywood Video did have a subsection of their stores called Game Crazy, but we all know what happened to Hollywood Video, so... And Blockbuster Video had their own... they tried to dabble with used game sales, but they didn't really make it its own store. It was just part of Blockbuster Video. And Blockbuster Video's gone. But in 2005, GameStop was killing it. Literally. They were destroying the video game marketplace. But they were a necessary evil. And I remember I went and got a job at a GameStop. It was actually one of the first jobs I ever had. And it turns out I'm a little more creatively slanted than most people. I don't know if any of this crap kind of clued you into that. But whenever something event-related would happen at the store, I was the person who was kind of called upon to make it happen. So y'all know that GameStop is real big about or they were, I think they still are, but who cares? They're real big about pushing pre-orders and sales of that stupid magazine that they used to have and all that other crap. And back then, back when GameStop still kind of had competition, whether you were kept or fired was dependent entirely upon these arbitrary bullshit numbers. So all those times that you used to go to GameStop and you would feel really pressured into buying things that were being upsold to you that you definitely didn't need, the reason that person behind the register was doing that was because they would be fired if you did not take them up on their offer. It was that fucking bad. And from what I understand, GameStop still treats its employees like total shit, so nothing has changed. However, going back to pre-orders and things like that, one of the things that GameStop stores do at their discretion is they can decorate a store for their for whatever's coming out. So I remember for the release of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, we were going to paint the windows on the outside because we were one of those strip center stores. And because I knew how to use a straight edge and measure things, and I could emulate fonts pretty well from printed paper onto a giant piece of glass, they would give me some glass paints. And for my entire shift, my job would be painting the windows with, you know, like GTASA, and then like the Xbox logo on the 6th window. And then people would know, oh man, San Andreas coming out for Xbox, we gotta go pre-order it, but also for PS2. But Microsoft wanted us to paint the Xbox logo on the windows because they were giving us money. So I would be the person who would do that. When the PSP was coming out, guess who painted across all 6 windows a really big PSP logo? It was me. When anything creative needed to happen in that store, it was me. In fact, when the store was opening, I didn't volunteer for this, but because I was the right body height, I was, you know, forcefully volunteered to do this. I put on an inflatable Sonic the Hedgehog costume and went and spun a fucking sign outside, dressed as Sonic the Hedgehog, spinning a sign, pointing to the GameStop, and having people honk and wave at me. It was a nightmare. So you might be wondering, Draco, you've been spending an awful lot of time painting windows, and an awful lot of time getting in touch with your inner Sonic fan character. You're probably not pushing a whole lot of those game reservations, are you? And I'm like, no. Not selling a lot of magazines either. So there was a fucking dry erase board in the back room. And it's not even the break room because you couldn't even take a break in there, but the tiny ass little back storage room. And there was a big dry erase board, and all of the employees had their names written there. And every week they would write down the numbers. Even if you didn't work that day, they'd put a 0 there. If you were off that day, you got a 0 for that day because you weren't at the store, which is kind of fucked up, but all right. But you would go back and look at that little roster, and then, you know, there would be zeros for the whole week for me, because I'm the motherfucker who's outside painting windows and dressing up as Sonic the Hedgehog. And every once in a while, you know, my manager, who was a completely inept piece of shit, would get on my case about it. And she would say, "Hey, Draco, what's the deal? You know, you're not getting a whole lot of sales on magazines, and you're not getting a whole lot of trade-ins. Are you not telling people about trade-ins?" I'm like, I'm not on the register. That's why there's so few transactions with my employee number associated with them. Remember when you told me to go outside and paint the windows? Is there a cash register outside? I didn't think so. And this went on a couple of times. And then finally, I guess it was like a 3-strike system where, you know, my supervisor basically gave me an ultimatum. She's like, "Draco," because that's what people call me in real life, "Draco, you need to improve your numbers." I mean, the regional manager, or whatever it is, whoever the boss's boss is, she's like, the regional manager, corporate's really, you know, saying, you know, everyone's got to be pulling their fair share. And again, I reminded her, I said, "I'm outside. If you want me selling your fucking magazines, get some other idiot to paint your goddamn windows. But I do what I'm told. You tell me to go outside and paint windows, I'm not going to be like, I don't feel like doing that. I want to be in here selling Game Informer." You know, I'm not going to fucking mouth off to my boss, except when they're giving me a hard time because they're dense as fuck. So finally, this went on. This happened a couple of times. Then finally, my supervisor pulls me into the back room before I clock in one day, and they tell me, they're like, you know, "Hey, we've warned you about your sales and numbers and stuff in the past, and they haven't improved at all." And I'm thinking, like, I already know what you're going to say. You're going to tell me I'm fired. And I basically jumped the gun. I don't even know if my manager was stressing out over this, having to have this conversation with me. I'm pretty sure I was the first person to be fired from that store. And I basically said, "You're firing me, aren't you?" And they were like, "Oh, yeah, because you're not," and, you know, they were trying to have this conversation about, "But your numbers," and I'm like, listen, I told you that if you wanted me to make sales, then to put me on the registers. But instead you had me dress up as Sonic the Hedgehog. You can't fault me for something that I couldn't even do in the first place. And I said, "This isn't my fault, but if you're going to terminate me, then fine, I don't want to work here anyways." And we basically talked for something and finalized whatever it was, because I had to sign some termination form or whatever. I got written up at one point, that's what it was. So I got written up, and that's like your first and final warning for getting in trouble. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So I signed whatever it was, and I just left. And the guys behind the counter, I'm like, "Good luck." And then I left, and I never actually went back in that store again. But I did. You guys are saying I dodged a bullet getting out of there. I did eventually get a little bit of retribution, because it turns out that the store's assistant manager and primary manager were both up to no good. The primary manager of the store was opening the store late and getting shit-faced and coming into work drunk quite often, and it was a problem, because if you're not opening the store on time, you're not making money, and that's going to piss off corporate. But what the manager would do is manually edit the clock-in times for everything, because obviously the manager's punching in late, but the manager also has the authority to override their own clock-in time. So that's what they were doing, to make it look like they were just so busy that they didn't just clock in first thing when they got there. And I was like, no, that's not what they're doing. Go watch the security tapes. You'll see him. You'll see the timestamp, and you'll see this person come in 20, 30 minutes late. They're not there on time. So I snitched on that. And then the assistant manager was doing this great thing where he was cheating people out of trade-ins. So whenever somebody would bring in a stack of a few games to trade in, if there was a game in that stack that he wanted, like Grand Theft Auto Vice City or something else, he would manually enter it into the system as Enter the Matrix for PlayStation 2, which is a game that we had so many copies of, they were literally being sold for 99 cents, meaning that their trade-in value was somewhere around a quarter. So he would ring those customers up, and they generally don't even check their receipts. They don't care. You know, you bring them in, it's like, oh, we can give you, you know, $15 for all this. And they're like, yeah, whatever. Fine, fuck it. They don't look at the receipt. They don't care. They don't look at this and say, I never owned a copy of Enter the Matrix. They didn't care. So he would take that game that he stamped as Enter the Matrix and keep it behind the counter, and then he would check himself out and buy that game, Enter the Matrix, and then he would also, because it's a used game, he would also get his employee discount on it, which is like 20-30% or something. So he'd basically be getting a relatively valuable game for like 70 cents plus tax. So yeah, I ratted him out too, and I'm like, yeah. So there's those people. So the third key, as it's called, I guess the regular person who has seniority there, who also has a key but is not the assistant manager, they were promoted all the way up the rank to store manager, and I'm like, all right, so my work here is done, and I left and never went back into that store. Yeah, exactly, Alex. But Draco, your numbers. Never mind the fact that we're ringing up our customers incorrectly, right? Like these motherfuckers were getting away with other like nasty shit, and their only gripe about me was that I didn't sell their dumb magazine, or I didn't get enough people to pre-order a PSP because I was too busy outside painting PSP on the windows. It's ridiculous. And basically, my story is one of many of like horror stories of people working at GameStop. Like, even to this day, even with like the coronavirus outbreak, GameStop is like, oh yeah, we're supplying our employees with necessary sanitation and stuff and all that. And then other GameStop workers are like, no, this isn't true. They're basically giving the store managers a discretionary budget to go out and buy like Lysol and gloves and things like that, but they're not sending them to us. We're at the mercy of whether or not any of these stores have these products in stock, and they don't. So we don't have them. So that's, I mean, that was even like this year. That was GameStop, you know, just treating their employees like shit. And that's nothing new. It's nothing new. There's nothing new. It's just GameStop for you. And it's one of the worst places I've ever worked. Hands down. Just shitty. It's terrible. Blockbuster Video was not much better. But